go. Well, good morning, everyone. This is Paul Camozzi. I'm currently Director of Commercial Development for Amvic Building Systems. Thank you for joining me this morning. This is a little different for me. I'm used to speaking to a large audience in person and just staring at my computer screen, but I've got lots of people helping me here. We have a lot of information to go through this morning, and I'll try not to talk too quickly. What I'm trying to do is get people to kind of get off of that proverbial wood concrete fence and start to adopt ICFs more and more, which we're seeing now in the commercial market, particularly for multi-story builds. We have a perfect storm going on now in demographics. We have the baby boomers, that's old guys like me, and the millenniums that are all looking at utilizing and occupying in apartment buildings or condominiums or retirement homes. And obviously insulated concrete form construction provides a lot of really good benefits for that. I've been involved in the ICF industry for over 24 years. I'm past chair of the industry. I lectured almost I've probably worked in almost all 50 states. And also parts of northern Canada. It's been a real fun, interesting ride, but we are definitely seeing growth in this sector, and stay tuned for this presentation. So without further ado, we're going to start this presentation today by a video that was prepared by architectural architects Jose in San Antonio, Texas. And the purpose of me starting my presentation here is to emphasize how quickly we can work with this medium called insulated concrete forms if we have the right people and procedure in mind. Keep in mind, ICF, in my humble opinion, is an ideal design build, methodology. It's about 80% thinking and about 20% execution. So without further ado, let's play this video. Please stay with me here. It's a 3-minute video. We try to get it a little bit shorter, but I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. This building was currently just erected a little over, I believe, a month ago. Take a minute here to, it says I'm muted. May take a minute here to load, I'm sorry. So let's go to my next slide. Well, good old technology. I'm not sure why that didn't load, and we just trialed this a few minutes ago, so I apologize that. We're going to see if we can get that up and going for you shortly. So without further ado, and I'll never, I guess when you're doing it for as long as I have been doing, we don't assume anything, but what are insulated concrete forms? ICFs, that's our industry acronym. Basically, they're hollow, lightweight forms manufactured using expanded polystyrene, EPS panels connected by uniquely designed high-impact polypropylene webs. During construction, the forms are simply stacked, then filled with concrete, making stable, durable, and sustainable walls. We're basically also known as a stay-in-place concrete form. With a combined insulating effective as EPS with thermal mass and structural strength, a reinforced concrete wall gives you a superior building envelope. Why use ICFs for your multi-story build? I put resiliency at the top of my list here today, and anyone who knows me knows I have a background in green. I used to be an environmental consultant, and that's what I breathe a lot of passion into. Mark my words, this word resiliency will be the next green movement in the United States, as it hasn't already started. I want to come back to that. Energy efficiency, of course, is huge. And in the early days, we were definitely moving people towards net zero structures. We're doing net zero ICF schools now in Kentucky of all places. But by getting that baseline demand down, we can start to play a little bit, and that gives us some really interesting results. Sound attenuation, I personally live in my second ICF home. Anyone who either is a tenant in an ICF structure or resides in an ICF home, the very first thing they will say is how quiet the structure is. And of course, that's all part of comfort. And if we have comfort, that means we're going to get retention. Fast 9-to-1 construction methodology means earlier occupancy and fast return on investment. Insurance reduction, significantly reduced long-term maintenance costs, and tenant retention. So we're going to dig into some of these areas a little bit deeper, and I'm going to have some actual real results for you. But again, it's what's really interesting here, and those of us who've been in the industry for as long as I, all it takes is for us to help you over that first hump and get the first building done. It's been my experience that once we do that, with all these factors in mind, developers, owner, operators do not go back to conventional construction. So we have a typical, and there's some ICF forms here just for people who are completely new to our industry. I guess I can go back in history again when we just looked at a 90-degree corner and a standard form. And that's basically how the industry started. Now we have taper top forms, taper top here. We can actually cut these forms and create a radius wall. We have molded 45s, and we have molded T's. We have brick ledge forms if we need a cantilever out here. And you know, one of the things just to think back on a little bit, if I have a good ICF installer, they can basically make all these different specialty forms in the field. But we've just made this so much easier now. In the early days, again, the Portland Cement Association in the United States and the Cement Association of Canada, we did a lot of marketing reviews on ICF. We would sequester people in a room and ask them what it's like to live in an ICF concrete structure. And they said it must be a square box, it must be a bunker, it must be cold. All these things are exactly the opposite of what we can contribute or participate with ICF methodologies. So we can do curve walls. We have terrific spanning capabilities over and above traditional block and plank or stick frame construction. Yeah. This 9-to-1 construction methodology, I'm kind of the laughing joke in the company because I keep increasing this number. It used to be like a 4-to-1 or 5-to-1. But we have so many cool things that happen once this form is in play. It's a perfect substrate for acrylic, a hard stucco coat. And I argued in one back in 2006 that ICFs do not equal EIFS. For anyone who's been involved in the EIFS industry, exterior insulated finish system, they were involved in a lot of class action lawsuits because what would happen is water would migrate past the foam board and get in behind to a wood stud, and then we'd have all kinds of issues. We're simply rendering a coating over the EPS foam. And some of you may or may not know that Amvic is an EIFS supplier. We actually make 2x4 foot panels here in Toronto to very close tolerances to support the EIFS industry. And we're basically using the same foam bead as we would use in an insulated concrete form. So when you're looking at your acrylic stuccos, which is my preference because of their tensile abilities, it's a perfect adhesion with the ICF. And with a lot of hard work from myself and others, most of the major stucco suppliers today have innate details on their websites on how to apply stucco coatings on an ICF wall. Utilities are easily installed with ICFs. After the pour, all we're going to do is simply use that foam as a chase to run our wiring, and most plumbing is done on the interior of the buildings, especially in the north, but it's very easily obtainable. Looking back, we have a lot of pushback in this industry from traditional tradespeople. Do you want to try and drill through wet lumber and run wiring, or do you want to just have a quick electric chainsaw and a hot knife and quickly scribe foam to do your wire chases? So it really becomes more education again, and we're looking at this type of large-scale construction now. I highly recommend that you have all your tradespeople on board at the very beginning so we can address all of their particular concerns. We have new code changes now where we're basically looking at complete thermal blankets from footing to rafter. ICFs are ideal for that for obvious reasons. But we provide an air barrier and a vapor barrier, so there's no more poly, there's no more things like Tyvek. We talk about excellent sound attenuation. Structure, of course, is reinforced concrete walls. Reinforced concrete walls. We're looking at a lot of changes there in regards to fibers and rebar. I have a background in structural steel. I actually worked in a factory where we produced rebar, and I was a quality control inspector there. So we're using rebar, and we follow ACI 318 in the United States and comparable codes in Canada, and how we place rebar in a concrete wall. Nothing has changed here. But when we have a reinforced insulated concrete wall, we're looking at a wall that's double the strength of a masonry block wall, double the strength. So, you know, it really is a phenomenal performing wall, and I'll come back to the strength in a minute. Closed cell expanded polystyrene. Please don't say styrofoam, which is a trademark name of like Kleenex, because it cheapens what we're doing here. So it's EPS is the product that we use, and what a lot of people don't know, again, it's a best kept secret in the industry when it comes to insulation, is EPS is the only insulation on the market that has no R value deterioration over time. So the sustainable, energy efficient, resilient building you build today is going to be just as energy efficient 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now, which is a real feel-good feeling for people like myself who've been put a lot of people in these types of structures. Very, very sustainable construction. These forms also have web ties, which acts as furring strips for interior and exterior finishing. Webs act as rebar holders for no need for tying. So we're making this process extremely easy, and we're minimizing our trades all in one step, just by the time we place and then fill that form with concrete. Features and benefit, well, ICFs address multiple fire codes in commercial buildings. Just one-shot deal. We don't have to bring in other issues or address other issues. We address and exceed changing wind and energy codes with no additional layering or reinforcement. I'll come back to that layering in a minute. Properly designed ICF construction creates minimal waste on job sites, and this is noticeable in job sites. Your job sites are cleaner, they're safer, and they're better organized. All the years of doing this, I've never had any serious injuries on an ICF job site, and for a lot of reasons. Can be applied to relatively unskilled workforce, provide lead hands, or properly trained. ICFs provide perfect concrete curing requirements. Very gradual hydration curves. Strong walls means strong walls. It's not unusual to pump at 3 and have these walls crack at 45 a number of years later. It's just that moisture that's retained in the concrete is a long, slow curing process versus just strip and have the sun hydrate the wall and lose a tremendous amount of the strength of the concrete in the process. ICFs protect concrete from freezing during winter construction, which extends the building season, expedites construction times. It's one of the first patents came out of Canada. That's why a lot of the ICF companies originated from Canada, is that we have obviously a much colder season. But this little exercise here can save literally tens of thousands of dollars by not having to tarp and torpedo heat a building if you are building in areas where we're into winter construction. I've never been involved in putting expansion joints in any of the buildings I've been involved in. Why? That concrete's not exposed to the elements. We've got lightweight construction, means minimal heavy equipment and machinery required, substantial reduction potential for workplace injury. Earlier occupancy, we looked at our occupancy rate grew in 2009, 2015 to 54 to 65%. We've seen a relatively large surge in new hotel development throughout the United States. And this earlier occupancy for hotel owners is huge. So with one of our Amvic customers, on a very conservative calculation, on a 50% earlier occupancy, it was a 180 room hotel. And we looked at a very, I guess, conservative, at that particular time, only 90 rooms were occupied. And if we can get them in 2 months, which is typically normal, that's 60 days. This computes to over $500,000 in revenue that's immediately going into your owner's pocket. Same will hold true when we get into multi-story apartment buildings, etc. So some examples of this. These are condominiums in New Jersey. You can see on the far left that we have traditional stick frame going up here, and then we're looking at an ICF structure here. Very quickly, we surpassed the stick frame. This is where the ICF structure ended up, and this is where the stick frame structure ended up. This product is now ready for leasing and renting. These people are still probably 2 to 4 months out. So what building would you like to be involved in owning and capturing that increased revenue? When we look at getting into large stuff, I always say twice around the perimeter and done. I can't tell you how many times I've pulled up to buildings and watched them layer the building, where they're going around and around the building. You can see here my lower levels are already closed in. Drywall is already in these rooms, although covered. And now we're looking at where the building is here, and we're ready to go that second time around and do our finishing. You also notice that no one's working on the outside of the building. Again, it's just the process for stack, brace, pour, floor. We're working from the interior out. So again, your safety margins go down. If I had my way in a perfect world, I really would be lobbying the Workmen's Compensation Group and get us a much reduced rate in this type of construction, simply because it's lightweight and we're preventing things like serious high falls. And then we're ramping things up even faster now. So this is complements of ICF panelization out of Albany, New York. Mike Cleary, Stephen Bluestone are the owners of this company. Stephen Bluestone, I'll come back to Steve in a minute, is a definitely early adopter to ICF, and this is the next stage we're heading to now. In my humble opinion, our most challenging aspect in North America today is labor, and how fast can we get structures up? So we're looking at doing things a little bit differently. This is an 8-story structure currently under construction in New York City, and the panels are manufactured in Albany, New York, and shipped down, basically ready just to be put in place and leg together and attach the bracing. All the thinking is done in the factory, and then we bring in the pump truck and fill up the wall. Jurien, this is, I guess, a long-term owner operator and with an Amvic customer. Today operates over 55 ICF hotels, with 15 typically under construction on a busy year. 55. I always say to people, if this stuff wasn't working, do you think we would have get past the first hotel? And on average, these people do, most of their buildings are large, 8 to 10 story structures. Resilience. As I mentioned, I truly believe this is our next green movement in the United States. Last year was the most expensive in recorded history, with $306 billion in recorded damages from Gulf hurricanes and West wildfires. This is $100 billion more than 2005 when Katrina and Ike came ashore. So IBHS, Institute of Business and Home Safety, I worked with those people in the early years, more or less for residential. I introduced their program to the people in the Carolinas for the first time, and we managed to get some pretty significant reduction in insurance. But now they're reevaluating commercial rates. Underwriters will continue to push for building code changes, particularly in coastal regions. $306 billion in claims. Achieving disaster resilience with ICF construction is now an AIA accredited program, co-written and authored by Amvic, and you can access that on our website to get AIA credits. But again, things like that word resilience, et cetera, just haven't been in our industry, and they definitely need to be here now. So this is Hurricane Harvey, ICF structure there to the north, and then conventional stick frame to the south. I know this is residential, but think of the cumulative and damages if we're looking at multi-story structures now. It really is a no-brainer when it comes to these wall assemblies. Wind loads, again, 200 to 300 mile an hour. It can be ramped up according to how we're placing our steel compared to 120 mile per hour for stick frame. The bigger thing too, we did projectile tests in the early days in Georgia. The first one I believe is in Georgia. This one says Texas Tech, where we're actually shooting projectiles at walls. Typical stick frame construction, those projectiles go right through the wall. Obviously, they just disintegrate when they hit an ICF wall. And they also will obviously be prohibited on a CMU, but I'll come back to the CMU in a minute. So this is a fire station, took a direct hit of tornado in Missouri. This was particularly embarrassing. The firefighters were trapped within their own building, and they just said we need to come up with a better way as things continue to change with climate and severe weather. So we rebuilt this structure. We use an 8-inch ICF. When you hear me say 8-inch or 6-inch, I'm always referring to the concrete core width. And we rebuilt this structure in record time. As you can see, not a lot of openings, which is an ICF installer's dream. Your difficulties or your hiccups will be window and door openings. And we rebuilt this to an F6 standard, I believe, with precast, large precast roof panels. You can see the beam pockets, the pockets that were built in, just cut into the ICF wall for these precast units to rest in and bear directly on the 8-inch concrete wall. But let's look at multi-story now, and this is one of the key reasons why Drury Inn moved to ICF. They got caught in a severe storm event. They typically do a steel stud EFIS assembly on the outside of their buildings. As you can see here, after severe storm, it just basically ripped the foam right off the steel stud. This was a multi-million-dollar claim. This hotel was about, I believe, 2 years late in opening. And that's when they sat down and said, we really need to rethink this, how we're building our structures. Fire codes. Well, isolated concrete forms are very resistant to heat. 2 to 3 to 4 hour interior fire rating is easily obtainable. Basically, we have to be covered by a 15-minute thermal barrier, and there's some interesting things happening there besides just drywall happening. But the reality is we have that huge concrete core thing that provides, phenomenal flame resistance. We're basically building structures that are they're just basically non-combustible. By law, we have to have a flame retardant in expanded polystyrene. This is not foam packaging, which goes up like gasoline. EPS will self-extinguish without a constant heat source. ICFs address multiple code requirements within one building, which supplies multi-story apartment and hospitality sectors. This is something that is very, very current. This presentation was done in November. U.S. fire marshals are going to drive change in the United States. The current wood lobbying efforts to date, $33 million since 2012, which have now allowed 4 to 7 story, multi-story wood structures to be constructed with some devastating results. Please visit NRMCA's site and look at America's Burning, as they list numerous multi-story structures that have caught fire. These wood structures reach flash point in under 3 minutes, dramatically endangering first responders and occupants. Just so you know, 3 minutes is basically the time the trucks are rolling out of the station. So when these trucks are coming to your particular multi-story building, all they can do is contain the fire. And these buildings are sprinklered as well, but when you have that amount of lumber with that amount of oxygen on multi-story, they become just infernals. Fire marshals will be implementing building rating plaques, which will be mandatory lobby postings. They have nationwide support. They have nationwide union support. Ownership of structures may change, but in their opinion, first responders see themselves as parents of the building's occupants. Parents will think twice about allowing their offspring to reside in low-rated buildings. So watch how this movement gains momentum because it's a serious problem and it needs to be exposed. Resistive to explosive environments, something you would not think of. I was at Quantico Marine Corps Base, I believe this was 2006, and we detonated 50 pounds of military-grade TNT next to our ICF wall. That wall was nothing special. We had 16-inch, number 4 bar, 16-inch on center, 3,000 PSI. Basically on the far right here, you'll see after the blast, the concussion of the blast blew the foam off and exposed our polypropylene webs, but the structure stayed. So consequently, we get involved in a lot of first responder buildings, fire stations, police stations, military bases, etc. Another dramatic example of this, compliments of Steve Bluestone. This was his building in New York City, and it was right sandwiched between a terrible natural gas explosion, which actually cost lives and completely demolished the building. But his ICF structure just received superficial damage, and he was able to get his tenants back in the building and occupied. Again, just a kind of a tribute to how strong these walls are. Insurance study, we're getting more and more data in depending on different areas. But when you get into non-combustible, high wind, that type of thing, you're looking at possibly having or more greater than your insurance. If you look at some places like Orlando, Florida, look at the difference on concrete versus wood. And this is not surprising to me because obviously these areas are subject to a lot of very severe weather. And again, this adds to your bottom line as the owner developer and capturing much lower insurance. Maintenance costs, effective 100-year service life, 200-pound poles, no drywall pots, soft cost reduced, minimal repairs after severe storm events, no hollow wall cavity for potential moisture migration, i.e. mold development. In most of the southeast and south of the United States, when we get a severe storm event, I'm thinking of places like the Carolinas, Georgia, Mississippi, Florida, far over into Texas. If that stick frame wall is compromised, we'll get mold development within 24 hours. And obviously, if you have a multi-story structure and rumor gets out that there's mold in the building, you're going to have a difficult time getting tenants who wish to move into that structure. So in the north, we have obviously much more severe weather, but I always say what happens 4 times a year? Well, 4 times a year we have a new season. And when we're looking at something like stick frame, that building will move. And when it moves, it creates problems and actually leads to the demise of the building because movement creates stress, stress creates cracks, cracks allow moisture infiltration, and now we have a much greater problem. So maintenance costs in ICS is virtually non-existent. Operating costs. We talked a little bit about that, but let's dig down a little bit further. A reputable hotel chain, we downsized their PTAC units from 9,000 BTUs to 6,500 BTUs. That's 240 volts to 120 volt wiring. The savings alone on that 5-story hotel was over $80,000 just in hard equipment and wiring costs. U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, they say we're looking at a minimum to 20 to 25% savings. I think that's very, very conservative. In most cases, if you do this correctly, utilities will be so low you can market your apartments with utilities in. And it's been my experience dealing with the millennium population that there's lots of difficulties collecting in regards to additional costs over and above rent. So if you can market utilities in, that's a good thing to be said. So when we look at energy consumption comparable, again, this is compliments to Steve Bluestone, who again was an early adopter. You can see in 2000, he had 2 ICF structures. Sorry, he had 2 block and plank structures. And then in 2010, he did an ICF 6-story. But folks, look at the difference in the operating costs in regards to that ICF and block and plank. And what they're doing now is tweaking things like lighting and water conservation, et cetera, where we're going to get this number even lower. So again, a really good testament of how this stuff works. It's probably what others have realized, like Drury Inns, et cetera, that they're really doing well on the energy conservation of these buildings. So case in point, this is a multi-story residence by EYC companies. We won the award in January at World of Concrete for the largest ICF development. And these particular buildings are being marketed utilities in. The owner of the building is telling me that he's capturing 30 to 35% savings on units compared to stick frame. Mr. Coleman's been involved in these types of developments for many, many years. And it's his experience. Typically, he's done most of them with stick frame. This was his first venture in ICF, and he took the top award. It just adopted a lot of the processes into his current process thinking, and he came up with a very, very successful build. This is a hybrid where we combine wood interior walls and floors, but we kept that ICF envelope. This particular project is in Charleston, South Carolina, and we're literally just a hop, skip, and a jump from the ocean. Sound performance, well, ICFs are typical STC of 50. We're also seeing a lot of the hotels now using ICFs for partition walls. If I go back to Mr. Coleman's project, I know that some of these indentations are shared living areas from the adjacent apartment, and he extended that ICF into the building for that reason, for that breaking up that living rooms, which he figured would be the largest area where sound would propagate from. So we can get involved in noisy infill lots near airports, expressways, rail lines, etc. And we're not, we're now viable building options because we can cut that sound down. And if I look back now on the residential side, anyone who's lived in an ICF structure, the very first thing they will tell us is how quiet the building is. Quiet is definitely a feature of comfort. If we have people who are comfortable, they're going to stay in your apartments. They're going to stay in your condos. They're going to stay in your retirement buildings. And it's a big part of that comfort equation. HVAC costs, I mentioned we can reduce those. Equipment, heavy machinery costs. Obviously, this is lightweight construction versus heavy construction. Even when we were doing panelization, those are light-duty cranes. We're not slinging huge, heavy mediums into position. Debt financing management. Let's dramatically reduce your forward carrying debt. So when we look at stick frame on multi-story, in many cases, the carpenters will come in and they'll build out. They'll build extremely fast, and then they have their hand out for payment. Well, now you're carrying that debt way forward because that building is nowhere near ready for occupancy. We just have a 2-by standing there. Someone's got to come back and sheet it and insulate it and vapor barrier it and air barrier it, et cetera, et cetera. Long-term maintenance costs obviously are going to be reduced as well. So these are all really, really good stories, and it leads to, again, the conclusion that people that do get involved in our industry, with successful ICF builds simply don't go back. And that's our hardest thing, is just get people over that first hump. So some examples of ICF commercial builds. The gymnasium here on the left was my first venture into the institutional side. This 24-foot high structure here is actually sitting on a 4-foot grade beam, which we created on with ICFs, which is on palisters because we were on unstable soils. Condominium complex is interesting. Obviously, when we get into northern Canada where this is built, you can see that it has an acrylic stucco finish. He has to have his trades out of there by August 1 so they can start working on the finish, because we can't get into a freeze-thaw cycle. And this particular builder has done numerous condominium developments with every other medium available, and once he used ICF, he's not gone back. Jurien, I mentioned. Little things like small commercial builds, these can be done extremely quickly, and obviously we are picking up that ICF envelope. Now we're getting into some bigger stuff. Student residence in Waterloo, Ontario. This was a 10-inch ICF form all the way to the top. Things have dramatically changed since I went to post-secondary school, where you're renting kind of questionable homes and stuff to live in. These are kind of state-of-the-art dormitories, and they're generating a lot of revenue for the investment partners that are there. Anyone who's been involved with post-secondary in residential accommodation, obviously these rooms are filled every fall. What was interesting here is that a very tight timeline. This condominium started in, dormitory started in August and was completed the following August, in time for students to be moving in. That's a very, very fast time schedule. People in ICF market, we can basically do a floor a week with ICF if you have the proper training and the proper planning. Okay, this Phoenix home was also an award winner this year at World of Concrete. What makes this one interesting is this particular owner developer used our new Plus form, which has an R28 versus an R22. His residents are extremely comfortable in this building, and he has plans to do several more with our technology. He was extremely happy receiving his award. Excuse me. Hampton Inn, Ottawa. Again, a perfect dance with hotel motel. What's curious about this here is I know the story behind here. We had a developer who was investigating ICF, who brought in a very good installer, Dave Dowell, and Dave came in and finished his first build. He was so impressed by that, he asked him to come back next year, and I believe it was 2 or 3 hotels he gave Dave to do and a convention center. Very, very impressed and happy owner, developer of these buildings. This is the ICF insurance building in San Antonio, Texas, and this is the one we'd like to play the video on. We're going to try that again. Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to Michelle and hopefully get the video going for you. Good job. Okay, dramatic. I'd like to special compliments to, excuse me, to Matt Zetmeiser with ICF Constructors and Jose with Architectural San Antonio for providing us with that video. What they told me when they were doing this building is that it became so crazy there because people were just at this four corners, people were just getting out of their cars. They couldn't believe this building was going up as quickly as it was. Matt's an award-winning ICF installer. We have some more projects of his that we hope to submit for our awards next year, but he's kind of figured this out. This is a 24 to 26 foot high building. It's all one pour. You notice the guys were all working off of man lifts to expedite the stacking. Just a really good testament to what we can do with this product in record time. Obviously, the owner is ecstatic because he has the envelope of his building closed in, and now we're just into cosmetics. Are we ready for any questions? Hang on. Okay. So what others are saying, the people at Avalon Bay were gracious enough to visit us at Charleston on EYC's development. In their opinion, we figure it's a cost neutral. Just so you know, Avalon Bay is arguably one of the largest apartment builders in the United States. They're looking at a -3% construction impact costs. They do believe it's 5 to 20% faster. I believe with the right approach, we can be a lot faster and at least 50% safer due to reduced labor force. That was one of the biggest things that I observed on the Charleston project, is how few workers were working on that site for such a large site. They also believe long-term benefits of ICF buildings provide versus wood, block, and plank are absolutely substantial. Quick recap, ICF, insulated concrete form. Well, you should understand that 9-to-1 construction feature. Again, get your trades educated early in the game. I believe some of these costs definitely should be coming down. Capture significant revenue with earlier occupancy. Resilient construction, the next green movement in the United States. Demonstrable lower insurance, maintenance, and operating costs. These are the year in, year out costs that you're paying as a developer and owner. High sound performance allows for more use of less desirable real estate and very comfortable occupants. Multiple commercial applications, hotels, condominiums, retirement homes, businesses, offices, multi-story mixed-use developments, schools, student dormitories. Amvic's been involved in all of these and growing. So this concludes my presentation today, and we're going to see if we have any questions that have come in. Anything here now at the moment. So the first question that's come in here is basically how you get started. And if you are looking at doing an ICF multi-story commercial build. One, obviously involve us early in the game. I wrote an AIA accredited presentation which I present to people about getting started properly and what happens when you don't do this and start properly. So aligning yourself with a proper design team, getting those tradespeople involved, and obviously involving us to help you with this process. It's my sincere desire that once you do this and we get you over that first one, which will support you 200%, that you won't go back to your conventional methodologies of construction. I'd like to give special thanks again to all of you for joining in, for Michelle for helping me facilitate this, excuse me, Jose with Architectural, and all you folks for listening today. Thanks very much.